Hello, friends, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode, I am thrilled to welcome Martin Armstrong to the program, an economic forecaster who has been called on by governments around the world in times of crisis. His models have predicted a number of events accurately, such as the 1987 Black Monday crash and the 1998 Russian financial crisis. Today, we're going to unpack his views on the ongoing trade war between the US and China. Will Xi play ball, or is it time for Trump to admit he doesn't hold the cards? The latest escalation in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Is Ukraine playing with fire? And is there any hope for peace? The EU ramping up their defense spending in preparation for a wider war. What is the end goal of the European elite? All of this and so much more in my conversation ahead with Martin Armstrong. Martin Armstrong, great to have you back on Commodity Culture. I want to start things off with what has been a major escalation in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukraine, of course, launching drone attacks on nuclear-capable planes in Russia. It seems like a lot of damage was done. Now, these planes were kept out in the open in full view of satellites as part of a treaty between Russia and the United States, Ukraine taking advantage of that to attack them as part of its strategy. So yet another treaty with Russia that has been broken in some way or another by Western powers. We also saw an attack on the bridge to Crimea. There's a lot going on here. We had the so-called peace talks in Istanbul, which were not talks. Basically, both sides exchanged memorandums saying what their demands were, and both were completely untenable. Neither side could ever possibly agree to what the other was demanding. So it feels like this whole thing is just going to continue to grind on. Russia not yet showing any signs of retaliating for these attacks. What are your thoughts on how this plays out?
Well, my sources, I got on the phone immediately saying, because Zelensky came out and he's deliberately trying to drag the United States into war. He came out and said he notified the United States. He didn't say anything about Europe, all right? And I checked with 3 sources in Washington, and everybody said absolutely no way. So I basically said, look, Putin better get on the phone right away and disavow this bullshit. Because Zelensky is just, he's really a slime ball. I mean, he takes his orders from London, NATO, and Paris. That's it. All right. You even had, Boris Johnson openly told the press, yes, we're in a proxy war with Russia. The Ukrainian people should get off their damn ass and remove Zelensky. He is not doing anything for them or their country. And this is our computer shows Ukraine is not going to exist. All right. Look, Western Europe, Macron has been kind of leading the pack. And they really do not care about any Eastern Europeans. I mean, they basically, what the hell with it? They were all communists before anyhow. And that's why Macron was there in Romania to, again, try to rig the election. They want Eastern Europeans to basically go against Russia, be the cannon fodder. As long you don't care how many die, as long as you take a Russian with you, and that's it. And then they can just walk in and nonchalantly take Russia. I mean, this is the game. And I've warned Washington. I think Trump now understands. His enemy is Europe. It's not Russia. And no matter, he even came out and said any immediate peace deal is off the table. Basically, everything he has tried to do has been obstructed by the EU. You got Kalis there, and the former PM of Estonia, boldly coming out and saying that Russia's too big, needs to be broken up. You got Boris Johnson out there saying, we're in a proxy war. I mean, how much more evidence do you need to know that this is not a war with Ukraine? This is NATO versus Russia, period. And my sources, from China, basically realized that, if this is the case, they are going to be in there with Russia, and Europe is not going to exist. I mean, it's going to break up. I mean, the EU is done. Germany, I can tell you, I was speaking with somebody in meetings in Brussels. I can't say who, but they got on the horn and said, why is Germany pushing for this war so bad? I said, largely because there's only two economies in the world that are actually shrinking. And that's the number of jobs. We're not talking about unemployment. We're talking about people that can employ are declining. I mean, Germany's seeing a massive wave of bankruptcies. So the two economies that are actually shrinking in size are Japan and Germany. Now, everybody was always bullish the Bunds versus everybody else. This is the real core problem. Germany is the one that's really in trouble. And they first had the COVID nonsense. Then they had the climate change nonsense. Then you had, the sanctions on Russia. You had Merkel, after the 21 earthquake in Japan, outlaw nuclear energy. I mean, I was in Berlin for meetings, and I had to go to Rome. I had to hire a private jet. There are no more direct flights. I mean, it was like, there was one at like 6 o'clock in the morning or so. I couldn't make meetings. I had to actually hire a private jet to get there. I mean, I never had to do that. I mean, before COVID, international flights were, pretty common. I mean, you could fly from Orlando, Florida to Moscow directly. Everybody wanted to see Mickey Mouse, But the climate change has seriously disrupted the world economy on absolute nonsense. There's no evidence whatsoever that, fossil fuels have caused any warming trend. I mean, if they ever looked at history, they would see there's ice ages, warming periods, back and forth. Just read Cicero. I mean, he talked about the pollution and stuff in Rome back then. The first Clean Air Act was 561, AD by, Justinian in Byzantium, or today Istanbul. So, I mean, this stuff's been going on for a long time, and they just pretend like none of that ever happened and we're the cause of everything, But without any evidence. And I can tell you I had people there at the UN, climate conference for their agenda, and they outright denied anybody that had any objection from speaking. That's not, so much for democracy, I mean, you're not allowed to have any counter argument whatsoever.
And now a quick break to hear from our sponsor, ARC Silver Gold. Osmium owner Ian Everard is considered one of the most honest and level-headed gold and silver dealers in the United States, praised even by his competitors. So give him a call today to take advantage of the specials right now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, mint fresh, only $2.47 over spot. Mint fresh silver maple leafs 2025 coins, 1 ounce, $2.87 over spot. While supplies last. Reach out today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. Yeah, democracy and the ability to have an opinion increasingly under threat, particularly in Europe. I do want to shift quickly to NATO urging EU countries to ramp up their defense spending. Here's a quote from Bloomberg. It says, NATO is asking European member states to expand ground-based air defense capabilities fivefold as the alliance races to fill a key gap in response to the threat of Russian aggression. We know that Russia doesn't have any intentions of invading EU countries. So is this increased military spending to improve the sinking EU economy, or does NATO truly believe the entire European continent is under threat?
No, they know it's not. Not under threat. Look, I've saw the internal memos from before. When all the money was going to climate change, NATO was concerned, and the memos were actually saying, how do we remain relevant? They only remain relevant and keep getting money as long as they keep saying Russia wants to invade. That's it. I mean, look, it's the other way around. They want to invade Russia. Why? Just look at history. You don't invade a country that has nothing. All right? Europe has no energy, no gold, no resources of any value. All right. Japan invaded Manchuria. Why? Because they had no resources. They were getting their energy from the United States. That was why they went into Manchuria. I mean, you look at all the wars historically. I mean, Alexander the Great, Rome, they conquered countries that were profitable. The soldiers shared in the spoils. If you go, well, we're going to go take out this country. Well, what do I get out of it? Nothing. Have a nice day. Goodbye. Just look at your history. I mean, it's as simple as that. What would Russia get out of taking in Europe? The French are just going to say, are you going to pay our pensions now? That's it. They get nothing out of this. And Putin's been there 26 years. Why wait till you're almost out the door? And all the evidence shows we started this whole entire war. Victoria Nuland was there. I mean, there were even, they instigated the whole thing. John McCain was there at Maidan. We count on you. We'll be backing you. Overthrow your government, etc. I mean, can you imagine if a major Russian politician stood on the steps of Brussels? Overthrow your parliament. We're behind you. I mean, come on. I mean, the audacity of this. And I've met McCain. I mean, honestly, I felt like taking a shower after I shook hands. I mean, that's just my opinion. I mean, he was there egging on the war. Victoria Nuland was handing out sandwiches at Maidan. There was, the clip of her that got leaked out. After the EU, they installed the interim government. It was the unelected intra-government that started the civil war with the Donbass. She immediately said, go attack those Russians. And that's what they did. Unelected government. And then if you look at Zelensky, when he ran, what did he say? He was running for peace. The death toll at that point was 130,000. It's now like 1.2 million. All right, so much for peace. You can even Google it up. I mean, Russia came out supporting him. They thought, great, this would end peace. This is what he's saying. And he did everything opposite. This is why, I talked to Ukrainians and they said if he was on fire, they wouldn't even urinate on him until he was dead. He's kidnaps people off the street. He's even thrown, kids with Down syndrome on the front lines. Without drones, he doesn't have anything. And according to information I have, some of these planes that he destroyed were relics. They were just sitting out there, and they were not even, they were the old versions that aren't used anymore. Look, I mean, he just takes orders from NATO, period. And I can tell you that I had spoken to Ukrainian military. They were told just to go to the border. It was MI6 from Britain that told them to invade the cursed region. One of his generals even quit. Ukraine's not... I've spoken to some Ukrainians. I mean, look, there was a peace deal. Putin was signing it, and what happened? Boris Johnson hopped on the plane, went to Kiev, and told Zelensky he's not allowed to have peace. That made the front page of the Ukrainian press. Ukrainians, I mean, we had 2 employees there. Basically, the question is, are they even allowed to have peace? Who decides it? It's not them. They're not, Zelensky won't allow elections. His bribed politicians that say, oh, well, he has our vote, so that's equivalent of all the people. Really? How much money have you been stuffing in your pocket? I mean, I believe Putin will respond, but against Ukraine. They've been trying desperately to get him to attack anything in NATO. He understands the game. Every red line he has put down, they cross. He said, don't give missiles to Ukraine to attack inside Russia. They do. Okay, come on, hit us now. He knows what they're trying to do. This attack, it's just another one. They tried to assassinate him on May 20th. Sent drones up to try and kill him. Why? Because Putin's not a communist and he's not a neocon. However, there are Russian neocons as well. You take Putin out and then you do have World War III. He's the one at least trying to, keep a lid on it. And I can tell you from Russian sources, the criticism he gets is that he should have gone into Ukraine, as the even Western press, full-scale invasion. Total bullshit. I mean, he went in to protect the Donbass, period. The criticism he gets is he should have gone in and done a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, as the U.S. did to Iraq. Shock and all, it would have been over in 3 to 6 weeks. Instead, just protecting the Donbass has allowed Zelensky to run around the world, oh, poor me, give me money, and it's only prolonged this whole crisis.
Yeah, I want to follow up there because we're seeing this ramp up in the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. We've got the U.S. now talking tough about a war with China potentially up ahead. Israel-Palestine, of course, continues, and the possibility of a conflict between Israel and the U.S. versus Iran. With all of this being said, how bad could things get? And is there a way out of this in your view? Is there any way to through diplomacy to bring about peace?
I don't think so. You have to understand the neocon playbook. I was in D.C. back with the Reagan administration years ago, and when Gorbachev made his speech, and Reagan wanted to go meet him. So what happened? The neocons couldn't say Gorbachev was a communist anymore. So they tried to stop him from going, and just said, "Look, you can't trust the Russian." So it turned from communism to just racism, and that, just look at European leaders. Trump is the only one that's even called them on the phone. All right, this is their agenda. This is what, and NATO's just a retirement home for neocons. And what did they tell all these leaders? Don't talk to Putin. Why? Because if you talk to him, maybe there might be a peace deal. All right, so if you cut off all communications, then you're not going to have a peace deal. All right, that's what they want. Like I said, every red line he puts down, they cross deliberately. And they want him to attack NATO, so our fake press in the West, oh, see, he's the aggressor. It's just ridiculous. I've been concerned that Europe is becoming so desperate. I don't see this diplomacy working. The economic conditions of the EU, they're imploding. Germany is 25% of the EU economy. Everything they have done, from climate change and sanctions and outlawing they're destroying themselves, absolutely destroying themselves. And with that goes the EU. And 3 years ago, doing podcasts throughout Europe, they would say, "You really think the EU is going to break up?" Now all I get is when. From Netherlands to Palermo. I mean, everybody's like, I've kind of had enough of these people. So you can see it's fragmenting. And this idea of one government, it never works. It never works. The only way it can possibly work is like the Roman Empire. All right, it didn't interfere in the local cultures, etc. The Christians said, "Oh, they're pagans. They got hundreds of gods." Not really. They just didn't go walk in and say, "Okay, fine, you have to adopt our religion, not yours." So they let everybody keep it, whatever culture they had, and so yeah, there are whole tons of gods around. Right? You can look at the Emperor Elagabalus. He worshipped a black meteorite that came down. Said, "Oh, this is the stone of God." It was in Emesa in Syria. And he became emperor. He issued coins showing, the chariot with this stone, being paraded around Rome. He was basically assassinated. Him and his mother, and their bodies dragged through the streets. But the Romans at least respected religion. They sent the stone of Emesa back to Emesa, all right, get the hell out of our of our city. But they didn't destroy it or anything. So that's the only way this can possibly work. I mean, if you look at the history of law, you go to Athens. Why women didn't have the right to vote? Very simple. Only the head of a household voted. If a woman was the head of the household, then she did vote. But it was because there were no laws against you directly. It was more or less, the head of the household represented everybody in the house. So it wasn't like the son got to vote and the father. That wasn't the case. Only one person. And it was more or less, shall we go to war against Sparta, yes or no? That sort of thing. It's when we got into this socialistic stuff, post-1890s, really, is when, we care about you, so I'm going to put in laws to affect you directly. Once that happens, income tax, things of it, obviously women need a right to vote. Now you're going after them directly. When you didn't bother anybody and there was no income tax and all this stuff, it wasn't necessary. When the socialistic stuff that started with Marxism, then it became necessary. So things have changed dramatically since then. But they still try to restrict rights to vote. I think even Mark Twain had said, if voting really mattered, they wouldn't let us do it. He's probably correct. But, Vietnam, you were 18 years old enough to be drafted, to hold a gun and go die for your country, but you couldn't vote, and you weren't old enough to have a drink. All right? That's democracy, So, you see it now. In Europe, I had a friend who was at the Vienna Peace Conference a few months ago. And he called, he says, this has got nothing to do with peace anymore. Everybody's ramping up for war, get ready for drafts, things of this nature. As you said, with NATO, I was just up in Canada. They've been told to ramp up their spending. And then, what's coming next, they haven't told their people yet, is drafts. This is the agenda. NATO's in charge. It should have been disbanded. I did a book, The Plot to Seize Russia, and perhaps you remember the coup against Gorbachev. What was that really about? I got the declassified documents from the Clinton administration. Russia was invited to join NATO. All right? Put it right on page 3, all the declassified documents. That's why they staged the coup against them. The Neocons thought that was like surrendering to the West. And they staged a coup against them. That's when Yeltsin stood on the tank and, don't fire on your own people, and the coup failed. But that's what it was all about. They wanted NATO to join, Russia to join NATO, and then NATO would have been right up against the border of China. That was their objective. I wouldn't trust anything these people say. They lie about absolutely everything. And as far as Eastern Europeans are concerned, they don't give a shit. They really don't. It's, you have Hungary concerned about, Ukraine actually attacking them. Ukraine is a problem. And if the people do not get off their ass and overthrow this Zelensky guy, Ukraine's not going to exist. It's not going to exist. Our computer basically shows it's going flatline, and it's never going flatline on any country ever that I've ever seen. So it's not my opinion, and I'm going, holy shit, Look, I learned when I developed this computer, it was mainly tracking capital flows and things of that nature. I never anticipated that it would be predicting wars. But we had a client in Lebanon, one of the major banks there, and they had found a ledger of the Lebanese pound written down every day back to the mid-1800s. They said, could you make a model on it? I said, sure. I stuck it into the computer, and the computer came out and said the country was going to fall apart in 8 days. I thought there was something wrong with the data. I called them. I said, look, there's something that's got to be wrong with this stuff. It says your country is going to fall apart. And very calmly, they said, well, what currency would you recommend? I thought that was a strange response. I said, well, it says the Swiss franc. 8 days later, the Civil War began. So clearly they came to us because they saw it themselves. They just came to us for the timing. And then I saw the same thing. We had a big shipper in Saudi Arabia, and he called and says, look, Iraq's going to start attacking the shipping in the Gulf tomorrow. What do you think gold's going to do? As he tell me, war's going to start tomorrow? Yeah. What do you think? So by the time, Russia came around, I stood up and it was, you can Google that, it was on the front page of the FT. They snuck in our conference in London. And I said, look, the computer says Russia's going to, collapse, and I give it about 30 days. That turned out to be the long-term capital management collapse, and all the banks, everybody lost in the Russian bonds, etc. And so I think it was 98. So I mean, we saw then 100 billion going in, but we saw 150 billion coming out. What I've learned over the years is that somebody always knows about war. And the insiders start moving their money in advance. You can look at all the, really all the military stocks. They started moving a week in advance of the Hamas attack. They're moving in advance again in UK. I mean, they're anticipating war. Somebody always knows, and they end up moving their money in advance. The SEC used our models on 9/11. They started looking to see who bought puts on airlines a few days in advance. This is pretty standard at this stage of the game. So, I mean, I never anticipated our computer would be able to do that. That wasn't my objective. I was just looking at markets. But then you realize that everybody's involved in the markets too. I mean, I was in our office in Geneva, and we had these guys come in. I thought they were Irish, red-haired, and they were Iranian. And they were trading the commodities to buy arms for a counter-revolution against the Ayatollah Khomeini. I even ended up managing money for Gaddafi twice, shutting down. I mean, he was in it. I mean, Marcos was in it. I mean, you have intelligence agencies all trading markets to make money covertly to fund something else. I mean, it's not just plain, vanilla out there. It's just not.
Yeah, and so with Ukraine potentially being gone in the future, would you anticipate that would be because of a Russian military victory, and instead of just keeping the regions that they've currently captured, the decision would be to go ahead and take over Ukraine and make it a part of Russia? Do you see that being a possibility?
If you look at history, all right, when you have a protracted enemy of this nature, and peace is not possible, all right, which is where we're at. The outcome, just look at Rome and the Punic Wars. All right, the third final Punic War. What did they do? They basically destroyed the city, took all the Carthaginians and sold them in the entire population, sold them into slavery. And they cursed anybody and said anybody that tries to rebuild the city where it is, we're coming right after you again. That was the only way, after 3 Punic Wars. It was Hannibal going up, crossing the Alps and all this stuff. I think basically, probably that's going to be the outcome. Ukraine has shown that it's not, the only way to save it is to overthrow Zelensky at this stage. You have to say, do you want peace? You had independence. You had your freedom, and you threw it out the window. All right? Um, I mean, just look, NATO bombed the hell out of Serbia because they supported Russia. All right. They got involved with the Kosovo wars, etc. Czechoslovakia, all right, it broke up into Czech Republic and Slovakia, ethnic lines. Yugoslavia eventually broke up after all the wars according to ethnic lines. That's the answer for Ukraine. That was the Minsk agreement. All right, allow the Donbass to vote and separate. We didn't need this war. This is all about a territorial grab. You got Russians there that Ukrainians absolutely hate anyhow. So what are you going to do? I mean, Zelensky's already outlawed their language, outlawed their religion. Oh, okay, fine. Christmas can no longer be Orthodox. It has to be December 25th. I mean, if you did this in the United States, try to outlaw Spanish, I think you're going to have a civil war. If you did it in Canada, try to outlaw French, you're going to have a civil war. You can't do this sort of thing. So it's deliberate. It can't be that stupid. And you wanted peace, all you had to do was honor the Minsk agreement. But then you had Merkel actually come out, and you can Google this. I was shocked, but she told the German press when they asked, how come you haven't enforced the Minsk agreement? And she said, well, we never intended to honor it. We just did it to buy time for Ukraine to build an army, which shows the West has always wanted this war. Period. All right? It's not Russia being the aggressor. And any story you read, oh, Russia's aggressor, they're propaganda from the neocons, period. Just look at the timeline and the facts. I mean, it's simple as that. From John McCain and Maidan, overthrow your government, U.S. is with you. I mean, come on. They have used Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, as cannon fodder. They don't give two shits about them. And they were trying to do the same thing to the Romanians. Romanians didn't want war, but they overthrew basically 2 elections. Why? Because the largest military base of NATO was being constructed in Romania. And the 2 politicians that basically, the politicians who were against it, oh, we can't allow them to win. Like Mark Twain. If elections really mattered, they wouldn't let us do it.
Well, that leads to the question, is democracy as we know it today fundamentally broken? Because obviously we're in a situation where elections are being interfered with, where democracy now means, well, as long as you're in line with our opinion on how things should be, then that's democratic. But as soon as you're against it, you're labeled as far right, allusions to Hitler and being a Nazi. I mean, it's called Russian propaganda. I mean, it's so extreme. And yet, on the other hand, you have a population that in many Western countries is largely brainwashed by this very media. And these are the people that are casting the votes. So the fact that brainwashed people who don't know anything about, beyond what they've seen talking heads say on TV, they watch the news and so said this, so said that. Okay, I think I'm going to vote for this guy. That's literally the process of most people. Is democracy broken? How can it be repaired, if at all?
Well, we never had democracy. We live in republics. Okay? They chose republics because they're the most corrupt. All right? Oh, I represent you. You're not allowed to represent yourself. Democracy is, we should have the right. Do we go to war with Russia, yes or no? We're never asked that. They make those decisions. We're handed a gun, and if you don't go out there and risk your life, you're going to be thrown in prison. Simple as that. That's not democracy. All right. If you just look at the EU structure, all right, Ursula, when did she ever run for an election? All right, she's appointed. All the heads are appointed. The people that make the laws, the European Commission, who the hell are they? Do they ever stand for election? Never. All right, you have no right. In Canada, people are beginning to realize, what is it with this parliamentary system? We didn't get the vote to put Carney up as the candidate. He's installed. All right. At least in America, there's a primary, and the people select the candidate. But this time with the Democrats, they didn't even do that. They wanted Camilla in there, and that was the Neocons. And I can tell you that, initially RFK was going to go on, being a Democrat, his family. They wouldn't let him on the ticket. Then he was going to run independent. I said, my computer says you're never going to win. All right? I advocated, I said, look, you're against war. The only shot you have is to join Trump. I was privy to, most people didn't know, but back in 2016, Trump and him had met. And Trump gave him the authority to create a vaccine commission. All the pharmaceutical companies, they threatened everybody on Capitol Hill to shut down that commission. It was shut down about 3 months before the COVID vaccines. So he was thrown out then. And that's why basically, I managed to say, look, you got to go with Trump, otherwise you're never going to get a shot at anything. And I did speak to him directly, and even I knew he was against war. He was even asking me, how do we solve this war? And I said, the first thing you got to do is cut off absolutely everything, money, intelligence, everything to Ukraine. That's where their mindset was. Then you have people like Lindsey Graham over there. Look, Graham and McCain were the two godfathers of the neocons. And I never met Lindsey Graham, but I did meet McCain. And like I said, after just shaking hands, you feel like you got to take a shower. And Lindsey Graham there's nothing that guy does that I've ever approved of. And what he did, in my opinion, I believe, was treason. He was over there telling Zelensky, don't listen to Trump. I'll get you the money. You're overthrowing the President of the United States on foreign policy. Where the hell do you come from? You have no such authority. But that's what these neocons are doing. They just want war. I knew Bill Kristol. I've been to dinner with some of these people. I knew Kristol, whose father started the neocon movement. All right. And back in the 90s, he was talking about removing Saddam Hussein, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi, and will bring peace to the Middle East. I said, you're out of your mind. I said, these people do not see themselves as Syrian or Iraqi. All right? They still see themselves as Shiite, Sunni, Kurd. The dictators, to some degree, were necessary. They prevented everybody from killing each other. That was really what they all did. You removed them, and then what'd you get? ISIS chopping off people's heads and shit like that. It's you have to understand the Middle East. This is religious. And it's like Ireland, North, versus South, Christian versus, or Catholic versus Protestant. As I've said, I was in Bavaria, and they said, oh, it's going to be a holiday tomorrow. I said, what's the holiday? Oh, we won the war. I said, which war is this? Oh, we beat Prussia. It was Bavaria's Catholic, Prussia was Protestant. I mean, they still celebrate it as a holiday. I mean, so when you get into religious disputes of this nature, you can't solve them. It's not, negotiable. So I don't see anything ever as far as that is going to be concerned, like between Israel and Iran. I mean, it's the best you can get is a stalemate, and okay, fine, I won't shoot you, but I still don't believe you have a right to exist. But c'est la vie. It's not an economic dispute. And even Ukraine. I mean, as I've said before, we had a conference in Greece, and our one employee from Kiev wouldn't fly back the quickest way because the plane stopped in Moscow. I mean, the hatred is just systemic. If you brought a bottle of Russian vodka to dinner in Kiev, they're going to take it and smash it over your head. I mean, I've tried talking to him. I said, you realize that, first of all, Stalin was not Russian. He was from Georgia. Second of all, Gaganovich, who took all the food from Ukraine. Yes, he was Stalin's right-hand man, but he was from Kiev. It was a Ukrainian Jew who basically, most people, scholars really think that he retaliated against the Ukrainians for killing Jews. You got to dig a little bit deeper. I mean, in Moscow, there's always been a debate who is really Russian. But this is the world you live in. It's a quagmire of ethnic differences, old hatreds. I mean, we gave a handful of jets to Greece, and what did they publicly state, made the front page of the newspapers? Oh, now we can stage a sneak attack on Turkey. Two NATO countries. I mean, the dispute goes back to the times of Alexander the Great. English and French. After World War II, it was the CIA that created the European Community, and it was de Gaulle who objected. And he finally said, all right, fine, because they threatened to take all the Marshall Plan away from France. And he said, all right, we'll create this European community. He accepted Germany, but refused to accept Britain. Because they hate the English. If you look at the timeline, Britain wasn't allowed to join the EU until Charles de Gaulle died. Simple as that. These hatreds go on for, I don't know. I've been in Europe for, over 50 years, back and forth. But, the history goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. People remember.
Yeah. I want to end on discussing Trump and Xi. They had a phone call today. I'm not sure what the outcome's going to be, but Trump has been saying that Xi has been very tough and extremely hard to make a deal with. Interesting he should say that after levying all sorts of extremely high tariffs on them, and seeming to ignite a trade war. Now, the original tariffs were somewhere in the neighborhood of 150%. I think they might have even gotten higher. It just got absurd. And then they sat down and said, okay, we'll lower it to 30. China will lower the U.S. tariffs to 10%. But now we're still in some sort of trade war situation where it doesn't look like the two leaders are seeing eye to eye. Do you think Trump suspected that Xi would fold, and now he's realizing that China has more leverage than he thought? How are you reading this whole situation?
Yeah, look, that sort of negotiating tactic does not work in Asia. We've had offices there. I've been dealing with Asia, and the difference is this, is that in Asia you have this saving face attitude. When Japan got into its bubble crash, people were literally jumping because they had to take responsibility, committing suicides and stuff. You cannot threaten China publicly. You just can't. I think that was a huge mistake by Trump. And by doing that, it mainly makes China dig in the heels, and they now cannot come to the table because it makes them look weak. This is just their culture. And you have to understand that. Putting that, all right, fine, I'm going to put tariffs at 50% against the EU, all right, fine, we'll come back. That's European negotiations. All right? We don't take it personally, per se. Asia takes it personally. You can't do that. So I think, 200% tariffs, whatever, nonsense. I disagree with it. You don't understand this, and you can't do. If you're going to negotiate with China, you better do it on the phone and not on the newspapers. Simple as that. Plus, China, we always had the one China policy. We recognized that Taiwan was technically part of China. All right. It was the neocons and Biden that disrupted that. You had Pelosi, hopping on a plane. Oh, you're independent. We got you. Whatever. All right. Once you did that, now China has to take Taiwan. As long as everybody agreed, the gentleman's agreement, yeah, it's really part of China. Okay, fine. They don't have to prove anything. All right. Under their culture, now they have to prove something. You can't do this kind of stuff. And then you had NATO, which is really, the National, Association of Terrorists, basically. They hopped on planes and they were trying to get Japan to open up an office there to expand NATO to Asia. They want war. These people are horrible. They should be dragged out of there by their hair. That if they don't have it, then put a leash around their neck, drag them out. NATO should have been completely shut down when communism fell. They were there against the Warsaw Pact. Warsaw Pact fails. Why do we still have NATO? Once you create any government agency, you can't shut them down. They will fight to the death because that's their salaries, their pensions, etc. All right? Simple as that. So NATO then tried to expand into Asia. All right? The Japanese people, I was there in Japan when there was the Gulf War. And Japan was sending money, but not, troops. Why? Because in their constitution, they weren't allowed to have, MacArthur stuck in there, they weren't allowed to have troops more than 200 miles offshore. And so the politicians were trying to change the constitution so that Japan could participate in these international conflicts. I was there in Tokyo. I'm telling you, there was at least 2 to 3 million people protesting not to do it. Why? I've been to Hiroshima, and you would think, okay, as an American, we nuked their city. And instead, I get people coming up apologizing to me that they forced us to do it. They see the war as their military aggressive, that they overpowered the emperor, etc. They don't blame the rest, they blame their own military. So, what I saw before, them protesting about changing the Constitution for the Gulf War, they're at it again. And NATO wanted to open offices there. And again, the people objected. This is building the military again. All right. You have to understand what the Japanese went through. And they are so against, they're afraid of a military dictatorship again, is what they're afraid of. So they rejected NATO opening up over there. But the politicians are basically saying we're really kind of in NATO, but not formally. And this has got China back up against the wall. And so you have North Korea paying very close attention, but NATO wants to get their foot in the door in Asia. Why? You're the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You're not Asia. You're not this worldwide military operation that they want to be. It's expansion. I mean, they think they're the modern day Alexander the Great or something. But they're poking the bear over there, and they're poking the panda on the other side. It's they just want war. And look, I have a clip on my site. You can Google it up. Sometimes I record things because they disappear from the internet, but it's the former president of Holland, of France, Holland, who is standing in Parliament alongside Merkel, explaining why they needed the EU to create one government to end war. It only promotes it. Because you can't, they ignore everybody's cultures and religions and whatever, one size fits all, and all this bullshit. And all they've done is fueled the old different ethnic lines. If you wanted to prevent war, hey, you honored the Minsk Agreement. Split Ukraine as Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia. Then there's no war. Oh, but we have to have this territory because there are Russians there. I mean, come on. I mean, they've been there for hundreds of years.
Well, Martin, this has been a fantastic conversation as always. Tell us about Armstrong Economics and the Socrates platform.
Well, Armstrong Economics, we keep it as an open platform. You don't have to put in emails or sign up for anything. We don't even sell advertising. We're not blocked in China, Russia, anywhere. So we try to keep it as a forum for the entire world, basically, without biased, bullshit. But Socrates is, you can go on there, the computer, it's the only functioning AI system in the world that has like a more than 40-year track record. It writes over 1,000 reports every day on every instrument from, Romania to Bangladesh. Every bond market, stock markets, currencies, everything's in there. The computer, does it, writes all these reports. There's no human intervention, so it's not biased or anything else. And that's why, so many institutions and central banks use it because, they don't have to worry about, by the way, overthrow your government or I'm bias this or whatever, it's all written, by a computer. I mean, there aren't that many analysts in the world to write that many reports. So it's providing a good niche for the world, and so many governments and everybody's kind of following it because of that.
Great. Well, I'll put links in the description below to both Armstrong Economics and the Socrates platform. Martin, once again, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's always a pleasure, and take care of yourself over there, will you?
Thank you for joining us today. Take advantage of the specials right now from ARC Silver Gold Osmium. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, $2.47 over spot. Silver Maple Leafs 2025 1 ounce coins, only $2.87 over spot. Wells Supplies last. Reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com. And make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.